Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will pull up my slide deck. We're good, I assume. So, what would a meeting be without starting highlighting COVID and statistics? So, again, our best indicator with respect to the level of COVID in our community or province is reliance upon wastewater. From the start of COVID, from the time they started collecting this data, it's been pretty much lockstep with respect to the various waves, meaning that in advance of us getting any increase or decrease in COVID patients in the hospital, it's about a 1 to 2 week advance notice, meaning when there's COVID in the wastewater, it takes about 1 or 2 weeks for us to see the impact of that, the level of COVID in the hospital. And that's been consistent from the start of the time they've been tracking this, which is pretty much from the earliest waves in COVID. They've been tracking it in the wastewater. And that's because, unfortunately, testing is not for the masses in the sense of individuals that are limited on who can be tested. Using PCR tested and tracking. So the numbers with that are very limited on who is eligible. And that's a worldwide issue that I know the WHO has commented on recently and has used the words that unfortunately, as a society, we're flying blind now with respect to COVID, is we don't know what's happening with respect to replication and or mutations and or variants. And we're going to find out, but we're going to find out hopefully not, but possibly flat-footed, especially as we get closer to the fall. So what we're seeing on this first slide is the COVID wastewater statistics for the province of Ontario. And you will notice, as we had thought was going to happen, is coming into May, is there would start to be a decline in those numbers, which we're starting to see, which is good. So there's been a plateauing of them and now a decline in the COVID in wastewater across the province of Ontario. Again, we'll start seeing the impact of that about 1 or 2 weeks further into the hospitals. This is a sub-regional view across the whole province. You'll look down at the bottom left, is our region is covered in there. And you will see that our decline started a little earlier than others. We started our decline in April-ish. So as a result, we have started feeling it in the hospital because it's been a couple weeks since that time. You'll see the other areas are also on a decline as well, which is good, which is again consistent with the slide, the first slide. So really drilling it down now into what it looks like in Windsor-Essex is you will see the fifth wave is identified there in the January increase. And then you will see the sixth wave almost went as high as the fifth wave. The gray numbers are the hospitalization numbers of COVID. And again, as I stated, you'll see that generally the numbers, as they're going up, it takes about 2 weeks, and then the hospitalizations have peaked, and then they start to drop as the COVID in the wastewater starts to drop. And that's what we're seeing, again, about a 1 or 2 week lag. So the good thing is it's going down. It doesn't go straight down. It's more of a jagged down as compared to the up. Always seems to be a straight upward climb, but when it goes down, it has ups and downs as it goes down, as there's replication still happening, and you might have some bumps in the system, and we see that at the hospital level as well with respect to community. So clearly, the bottom line is we're not out of this yet. We're not out of wave 6 yet. It's still with us. The numbers are still there. There's still a significant community spread happening in our community. And as a result, as I stated, we're still seeing patients coming into the hospital having to be admitted with COVID and being treated with COVID, plus those patients that are not admitted for COVID yet. They also are testing positive for COVID as they're being admitted. So when we look at the provincial hospitalization rates, is you will see there is some plateauing happening now, where we are at the currently hospitalized is the just under 1,700, 1,698. Of that, 733 are identified as being admitted primarily or exclusively for COVID. And you have the ICU numbers again are remaining still constant. So that's the good thing is again, it's starting to level off and hopefully we start dropping over the month of May. And when we get into June, most likely, hopefully by the June board meeting, we will see our COVID in hospital rates across the province and including ourselves start to really stabilize, and we'll probably run that out for the months of June, July, and August. Everyone, unfortunately, is getting prepared for what's to meet us in September and October, in addition to the normal respiratory issues that we're going to be facing. It's going to be, again, as the WHO indicated, what variants are happening right now, pretty much unbeknownst to us, or subvariants that are happening that are unbeknownst to us because of the replication and mutation that will surface in the fall. So we will have to be prepared for that. As a hospital, we are continuing to examine our practices with respect to the screening processes coming into the hospital, the level of PPE people are wearing. We are not removing masks. The government, since the last time we spoke, did extend masking required in hospitals until the end of June. We won't talk about that till the end of June, meaning we won't examine whether we're going to be relieving that or not. They work. We'll probably keep them in place, but we might look at some of the other PPE levels, and definitely the screening of patients and visitors we will examine. Again, right now, we're mandated to have all of it in place. The screening of visitors, the screening of staff, that is mandated. We don't have the ability to remove that. So as a result, we have to keep it in place. But again, we're developing plans, looking out into the future, possibly relieve some of that if we're allowed to. And at the same time, being ready to reinstitute it if we need to, if the fall does pan out the way, unfortunately, everyone is thinking it's going to pan out as we move forward. When it comes to, this is our hospitalization rates for WRH in particular. And you'll see, as I indicated, they started to drop a bit on a jagged move in or around the last week of April. We started to have a drop. So hopefully that continues to drop along with the COVID wastewater. But again, this is the COVID wastewater indications are very consistent with our own numbers and with respect to hospitalizations here in Windsor, Essex. And it's been something we've looked at and we use. And the board has heard, as we talked to the board and shared with the board, we had some exciting news announced this week with respect to the new acute care hospital project. The dates for the tender process, including the shovel in the ground date, is now what is termed baked into the provincial budget, meaning they're fixed. And some people might have said, oh, was that like a pre-budget because it was announced the day before the writ was dropped or day of the writ was dropped? Is that like a political stunt or something? And it's like, no, it's not. Every quarter, Infrastructure Ontario issues a market survey. And we've been in the market survey for quite some time. This actually bakes the dates and assigns all the various dates for the projects coming up. what needed to happen and what the province needed to do and what they've been working on with Infrastructure Ontario for now months now is slotting in the various projects, aside from hospital, all the other infrastructure projects that have been approved through previous budgets as a timeline moving forward. What we have to recognize is that in Canada, we have only probably 3 or 4 general contractors or companies that have the ability to do a project the size of Windsor Regional Hospital. It is in the books at over $2 billion. And as a result, it's a rather substantial project. And the last thing anyone wants to do is flood the market with multiple projects in the same year, and the 4 are overwhelmed and they cannot complete them. And therefore, either there is no bids, or the bids that are offered are very high because they're already stretched to the max with respect to existing projects. So they have to separate them out over the various years in order to accommodate that. And at the same time, they have to separate them out because there's a budget. So they got to pay for all this. So as a result, they can't have everything fall into the same budget year. They got to divide it up with respect to being able to fund all of this, and for the years and the amounts of money that have to be paid over those years to have the project continue and to get completed. So again, that's why we have a lot of work to do between now and 2025 when the RFP process starts. There is some flexibility between the RFP process and the time the shovel is in the ground to possibly move it forward a little bit. But again, we'll have to see what the market conditions look like, and then we'll be guided through Infrastructure Ontario with respect to whether those dates are moved up. But we are very pleased that basically in the last 18 months, not only did we get funding for stage 2 that we've already started, but at the same time now the dates are baked into the budget. So this project is real. It is going to be happening. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to get there. And June, Mr. Landry, who's the project director, is going to be coming and doing a presentation on all of this, and also giving some concrete examples of what kind of work needs to be done. I didn't mean any respect to Costco or Walmart, but we're not building a Costco or Walmart. And I'm not saying they're simple to build, but as compared to a hospital, they're simple to build. So when we look at what is going to be what's going to take place in this hospital with respect to the engineering requirements and the details that are involved in the construction of the hospital, it's rather intense. So Paul Landry is going to identify and give some concrete examples of what that looks like in particular areas on how much work needs to be done in order to ensure it is built properly and the required specifications are done. So he will be talking about that in June. So again, very exciting news. And what I tried to indicate the other day too on the radio is, for Windsor Essex, being, raised here, born here, pretty exciting time. Is the amount of private sector, public sector that's going to be taking place over the next few years is, transformational is not even an appropriate word to describe it. When you look at the battery factory, when you look at Stellantis, new product, third shift, and I think the biggest issue here is the R&D with 640 engineers. The one thing is the economy might go up and down over the years, and car sales might go up and down. But one thing is consistent, it's research and development is pretty much a stagnant investment. If anything, it goes up. And that's pretty exciting to have that located in Windsor, Essex as well. That's going to be substantial, the impact of that. And then, of course, our $2 billion hospital project. And we can't forget there's a bridge out there too that's going to be built. And the price tag on that, we'll see what the end price tag is. But it's going to be in the billions. So if you just look at the battery plant, Stellantis, R&D, and the hospital alone, that's $10 billion. You tack on a bridge, that's probably another 3 to 4 billion. I don't know the exact amount, but it is substantial. So That's a world-changing investment that any town in any city across the world would greatly appreciate even one part of that, let alone all those segments, let alone everything else that's being built. I'm just focusing on the big ticket items. So kudos to Windsor Essex and its leadership for pulling this off, and also the province and the feds for making it happen and working with private sector. So if needing a hospital pre-COVID wasn't evident, if COVID didn't make needing a new hospital evident, then all of this activities pretty much adding to it that we desperately need a new hospital for our existing residents and those that are going to be joining Windsor Essex in the next few years. So I'm Mr. Chair with my presentation.